All right, greetings, comrades. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight, because we have a good host of speakers, as you can see, we're going to kind of jump straight into it and get the program moving. You are tuned into the joint collaboration between Cooperation Jackson, Community Movement Builders, and Black August Los Angeles. This is our third and final, at least for 2020, Black August Resistance program. Today, we're definitely going to be focused on what I think is one of the more timely subjects in the here and now, and that's the need to construct Black-Brown unity. Critical topic because there's a bunch of both liberals and reactionaries working double hard, working overtime to make sure our peoples don't connect, don't unite, stay divided, stay weak. And it's our task as revolutionaries to cut through that bullshit and put our people together on a platform and program and on the basis of revolutionary principle that we know we need going forward. So first, tonight, we're going to start with Thandisizwe Chimurenga, just to give us a bit of a breakdown of some of the concrete history of unity within the construction of Black August, like how that started in practical terms behind the prison walls in California in the late 1960s, early 1970s. So we get a real concrete breakdown of what it took to survive behind those walls in the face of the war with the prison guards and the white supremacists that they collaborated with on the inside, what it took, right, to not only survive, but give a little in the sense that they were taking it from those repressive forces. So without ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Kali. Greetings to all the other panelists. How y'all doing? Hope everybody is taking care of themselves, staying safe in the midst of this pandemic that we are still dealing with. Despite this pandemic, police are still killing us. We still dealing with that. And the brothers on the inside been dealing with that for a long time, sisters too. And now they're dealing with COVID in the prison. So it's an overall mess of madness that we have to deal with. But here in Black August, a lot of us do prison work the rest of the year, the other months of the year. And some of us really don't talk about it or think about prison work unless something happens. Black August began in the prisons. And right now, today in 2020, we see if it's a deliberate effort, I don't know. If it's unintentional, I don't know. But we see an effort being made to erase where Black August began. It began in the prisons of California, and some of the people who were there in the beginning or were close to people who were there in the beginning are still here today in California prisons. And the reason that they're still in California prisons is because, like most of these penal institutions, they're very, very vengeful. The state does not forget. And when people take a stand against the state, they remember. We may forget, but they remember. And so George Jackson has been hated throughout the California prison system. He was physically murdered in August of 1971, and they've been trying to murder his spirit ever since. They have not been able to do it. And so they do the next best thing, is they penalize those who stood with him, those who look up to him, those who have learned from his example. His example was one of transforming the colonial or criminal mentality, as Atiba Shana, James Sales would say, into that of a revolutionary mentality. And that's very, very significant for Black people in a society built on anti-Blackness. And before I pivot or start, I don't want to start with the actual history. I want to jump into the actual subject matter. We've been talking about Black August. A lot of us since the end of July, August 1st, had many programs. There's a Black August Los Angeles page. There's a Black August Los Angeles calendar page, a Black August organizing committee founding organization of Black August, Sacramento chapter. You can find the true history of Black August if you search. But I want to pivot now to the San Quentin Six, because that's the concrete expression of unity that we're talking about. One of the reasons George Jackson was so hated is because he understood that in order to stand against the state, you're going to need unity of what they call the prisoner class. And in a nutshell, excuse my language, behind the walls of prison, pretty much everyone is a nigger. Pretty much. They're all niggers. But the state thrives on division. They thrive on separation. And so in California, the three major ethnic groups, Mexicans, Mexicanos, whites, and blacks, separated in terms of housing, or should I say segregated in terms of housing, segregated in terms of mealtime, segregated in terms of exercise time on the yard. As a matter of fact, some of the founders or some of the men who were included in the first memorialization of Black August, W.L. Nolan, Cleveland Edwards, and Alvin Miller, they met their fates because as Black inmates, they were let out onto the yard when it was time for the white inmates to have their rec time. So you got like three brothers with hundreds of white Aryan Brotherhood members on the yard. That's the kind of stuff that the guards would do. And I know specifically those of us from California, I know we're not surprised by that, because just a few years ago in the news, they were talking about gladiator fights where guards would set up fights between inmates. So this is nothing new to us. But Comrade George Jackson was known as making unity amongst all of the prisoners, getting them to understand that they are of the prison class. Some of the whites remember him from that time, and a lot of them don't. You know, white supremacy is so baked into the consciousness, right? But the prison authority had been meaning to assassinate George for a long time, and that date came on August 21st, 1971. And during the ensuing chaos of what happened, two white inmates who were said to be snitches were murdered. 3 guards were attacked. I think 1 was killed. 2 had their throats slit, but they survived. And so the prison administration picked out 6 brothers that they said did those deeds. Fleeta Drumgo, Johnny Spain, Bato Talamantes, Hugo Pinel, Willie Sundiata Tate, and Charles Johnson, also known as David Johnson, also known as Jeb. They called him General Jeb. These are the men who stood with George Jackson, not only on that day, but before then as his comrades. These are the men who were accused of killing people when George Jackson planned his escape. These are the men who went on trial and were eventually either acquitted or found guilty of minor crimes, not necessarily murder, and eventually some of them were released. Now, Hugo Pinel, an Afro-Nicaraguan man, he considered himself to be black, and that's where his loyalties was, that's where his consciousness was, but he was from Nicaragua. He ended up being convicted, staying in prison. Most of the time he was in prison, it was in solitary confinement. He was eventually released into general population in 2015, and he was assassinated by members of the Aryan Brotherhood in general population. Bato Talamantes, a Mexicano Chicano brother, was eventually released. But these 2 brothers stood with George Jackson. They stood with black folks. And California prison politics, I'm not privy to all of it because I'm not a man. I've never been to California prison. But prison politics can be a very, very tricky and dangerous thing in terms of loyalty and allegiances. It is quite possible. I talked about Bato Talamantes years ago. I met him in the Bay Area. But I don't remember the exact story he told me. But it's plenty of elders around who we can talk to. It's quite possible that Hugo Pinel and Bato Talamantes risked death because they did not align with Mexicano prisoners at that time. I'm sure that we know that members of the Brown Berets and other organizations began to be arrested for their political work. So at a certain point, the consciousness changed, young lords, etc. But at the time in 1971, 1969 to 71, I'm not sure what the climate was in terms of Chicano, Mexicano, or Spanish-speaking prisoners, but it's quite possible that because, I'm not sure, like I said, the consciousness, the political activity, it's quite possible that they risked death because of their political work and their allegiances with George Jackson. So when we talk about Black and brown unity, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. That's the summit of the work that we're talking about. Unity, working with one another and facing death, because we are all at this very moment at odds with the state. Some of us have faced mounds of repression. Some of us have not. But as we can see what's happening in Wisconsin, in the midst of this pandemic, police are still killing us. They are the armed forces of the state. We haven't seen the full force of the state just yet. Protesters in Louisville, Kentucky, Kenosha, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Charlottesville, Virginia. We have not seen the full force yet. In Seattle, Washington, in Washington, D.C. This is warm up. In prison, where it's a much more smaller, intimate environment, they face brutality, they faced horrors every single day, but they faced them. They stood against them. They made that pronouncement. Whatever you do to us is going to be done to you. You coming for us, we standing right here. They did that in prison. That's the kind of unity that they exhibited. We're going to have to get that understanding and exhibit that same type of unity, because an AKA as vice president is not going to be what we think it's going to be. It's not going to be what we think it's going to be. We thought having a brother on the Supreme Court was going to work out. I'm not even sure of the first brother that was on the Supreme Court. He kind of shaky in my mind, so don't make me go back to him. We keep searching for representation, which is wonderful. We need to see ourselves, but it's not just a physical representation. It has to be an ideological representation. If our politics is not represented, then we are in bad shape. And again, that goes back to why George Jackson has been hated all of these years. Throughout the state of California, we have hundreds of stories of brothers, primarily Black men, who have been placed in secure housing units, the SHU program, also known as solitary confinement, because they uttered the words George Jackson, because they celebrated or participated in Black August. We even know of one case where a brother was thrown in solitary confinement because he had a copy of the San Francisco Bayview newspaper, which talked about Black August on the cover. Mind you, he requested permission from the institution to get the Bayview sent to him to subscribe to it. They gave permission. They go through his cell, see Black August, and being the reactionaries that they are, lock him up. It's the idea that it represents. Brother Baba Daruba Ben Wahad talked about that one time. It was the idea of the Black Panther Party that had to be destroyed. The idea of what George Jackson represents. George Jackson talks about class struggle. He talks about economic and property relations that have to be overthrown in order for the slaves, meaning all of us, to be set free. He talks about fascism and what it means and why it's already here. It is the idea that they have been attempting to kill all of these years. You know, Stanley Tookie Williams, who a lot of people know as a founder of the Crips, notorious throughout South Central Los Angeles, ends up on death row for the murders of 4 people, sits on death row for a number of years, transforms his mentality, now renounces gang life and gang violence, attempts to steer young people, children out of the gang life, writes children's books, he requests clemency, requests a commutation of his sentence. Then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger denies clemency, denies the commutation of his sentence, denies the stay of his execution. Why? When you read the documents, you see why. He dedicates his book to George Jackson, Assata Shakur, Angela Davis, Geronimo Gijaga, and all the other black men and women he says have made a stand for a better life for black people. That's not how the state of California sees it. The state of California sees it as, see, he still believes in violence. He's still a dangerous man. Clemency denied. So this is the idea that needs to be stamped out. Not only the idea of class war, not only the idea that fascism is here, but that arms must absolutely be taken up in order to free ourselves from this madness. George Jackson is alleged to be a member of the Black Guerrilla family, along with those brothers, W.L. Nolan, Alvin Juggs Miller, Cleveland Edwards, other brothers in the penitentiary. And what was the Black Guerrilla family? What was it? I mean, it's not like they broke out of jail and waged war against the White House, right? Well, within the California prison system, black men were being murdered with impunity, kind of like right now today. And finally, the brothers would appeal to the prison administration. This is wrong. This guard needs to be brought on trial. There needs to be a sanction. There needs to be this. There needs to be that. There was no pretense of that behind bars. Finally, the clamoring got so loud, they said, okay, we'll put a guard on trial for the death of an inmate. It was justifiable. The brothers behind the wall said, no more. We're not participating in this type of a sham anymore. From now on, my wife crying, your wife gonna be crying. If my mama's crying, your mama's gonna be crying. And that's how the Soledad brothers actually came to consciousness. They were accused of murdering a guard in retaliation for a guard being let off for murdering Alvin Juggs Miller, Cleveland Edwards, and W.L. Nolan. So these are the reasons behind the commemoration, the remembrance of George Jackson and the men who stood behind him. These are the reasons why we raise up the examples of Bato Talamantes, Luis Bato Talamantes, and Hugo Yogi Pinel, because they stood, not only because they stood with George, but because of what they stood for. They stood for that class of prisoner unity against the state, which sees us all as niggas, which would rather us all be dead, which exploits us ruthlessly and mercilessly. And that's the kind of unity that we're going to need. We know that African people are all over the globe, in Venezuela, in Puerto Rico, in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, in Honduras, and Guatemala. Their children make their way here in search of a better life because their home countries have been wrecked by imperialism and neoliberal policies of Europe and the United States. We are, in many instances, one people, and in other instances, we are cousins. We're still family. We're still related. And we're going to have to adopt that type of attitude to stand against this monster. It's standing against us. So we need better clarity and better consciousness. I could go on, but we have other people here tonight.
Right on, Tandy. We'll come back to that. But I think that was a solid foundation. So definitely appreciate you on that again to get us started off right. Next, again, trying to just cover as much territory as we can within a 2-hour time frame. And you see how fast it goes. So we are already almost at a 30-minute
Sorry
mark.
about that.
So I want to move next to sorry. I think that was good. Covering some territory I think many probably have not heard, particularly as this thing has become more popularized. And I think it's our duty to kind of flip that on its head and make sure that folks have a real solid grasp of both the history and the politics behind it, so they know really what they represent and take some responsibility for it and moving it forward. But with that said,
make sure Ayanna Presley knows this is about prison revolution, because I don't think you know.
That's right.
She about to find
Well, the
out.
state will let her know pretty soon.
Okay.
Yeah, she's about to find out. But I want to move to Manuel. Brother Criollo, what you got for us?
Well, greetings, everyone. I'm really honored to be here tonight with comrades in the struggle, really important warriors and movement leaders, many that I know at least for 2 decades, if not longer. I don't want to age us completely, but my name is Manuel Criollo. I've been a longtime organizer from Los Angeles with the Strategy Center, and now I'm here in occupied and unceded lands of Tiwa here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I'm also a member of the Red Nation here. But I'm speaking as sort of an individual today, trying to grasp this question about what is Black and Brown unity in this moment of Black August. I think that it's important as these are days of remembrance, days of learning and training. For Black August 2020, and as Thandi reminded us, right, it's 49 years since the assassination of George Jackson and the beginning of the trial and persecution of this kind of multiracial San Quentin Six, which of course included Hugo Yogi Pinel and Luis Pato Talamantes. I speak to you as a son of El Salvador in Central America, born and raised in Los Angeles, sort of occupied Tongva land, and I make one of 1 million Salvadoreño people who were dislodged and exiled from our ancestral land and national territories at the hand of U.S. sort of counter-revolutionary and counter-insurgency war in Central America, where the U.S., through its own proxy war against communism, in tandem with their kind of torture and scorched earth warfare strategies, and military complex sustained murderous military oligarchical governments throughout Central America to quell Central American national liberation and regional liberation movements, killing hundreds of thousands of indigenous, Black, poor, working class, urban, and rural workers in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, to name a few. As I said, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I was raised in the streets of South Central Los Angeles in Pico Union during the height of the city of Los Angeles and LAPD's war of extermination and entrapment against Black and Brown Los Angeles during the crack invasion and police occupation. So really, I think of this kind of positionality that my folks went from one war to another war. And I think I want to share some thoughts tonight, and I want to call it about what does a captive nation have to teach us about an open air death camp called the United States of America. And, Black August really centers not only the legacy of Black liberation and Black possibility, but also centers the voice and the sacrifices and the legacies of politically incarcerated Black liberation political prisoners and freedom fighters. And it asks us to recognize also more broadly the captive incarcerated nation of a Black nation in the United States. This country birthed out of stolen land, genocide, slavery, colonization, imperialism, and anti-Black apartheid is reaching its pinnacle of surplus exploitation, extraction, and subjugation of oppressed peoples within its borders. As many ways, I always say the United States is not one nation under God, but one nation under the gun. And right now, as we speak, right, there's over 177,000 people who died, tens of millions who are unemployed, hundreds of thousands of people who are going hungry on the verge of houselessness, to join the tens of thousands already unsheltered and unhoused Black, indigenous, and brown and poor people in this country. An ongoing sort of declared war on the Black nation, as we've seen this latest shooting. And of course, I think it's important for us to kind of give context. Why do we think of this why do we need to think of this as a captive nation? One is that, in the United States, there's 2.3 million people in prisons and jails. That's on one day. That's what they take on a picture of one day, where they count the whole system and they say, well, there's 2.3 million people in prisons. This includes local jails, federal prisons, detention centers, you name it. Then there's 4 million of formerly incarcerated people under state or federal sort of prison who've been under in some form of parole or probation or under sort of federal, under government sort of control. Then, if you think about it, there's 77 million people who have a so-called criminal record in this country, and almost 10 million people are arrested each year in the United States. And when you add them, they're saying that over 113 million people have family members who have been in prison or in jail in this country. So I try to do the math. I'm not really good at math, but what I found out was that that's 250 million people, right? Now, I don't know how many of these are repeated numbers, how many of these are unique numbers, but if we put that in context to the population of the United States, the population of the United States is only 328 million people. That would make about 66% of this whole country has one hand under this system. And we have to see that this country is reached its pinnacle of extraction, and that an aspect of what we know in our communities have suffered, the system of incarceration, the system of immigration sort of enforcement, and ICE and the Department of Health, Homeland Security, and the counterinsurgency that we see against sort of movements. We have to sort of really understand what does that mean for the possibility for the future. And I wanted to at least take three things that I think would be important for us to think about. One is that when we think about Black, brown, and I would say even red unity and praxis, right, that we can't only think about it as a question of solidarity. We should also think a lot about it as a strategic hemispheric resistance. In other words, like if we really put, actual rebellions in a whole map at the same time period, we'd see all these incredible moments of possibilities. So we think first, something like the rebellion of Wate, who was a Taino leader from the island of Haiti in 1500, when Columbus and his whole crew of killers and assassins came over to the Americas, right? What they built an army, right, to resist Columbus's colonization, and it took almost, and not only his army was made up of his people, but also he took on self-emancipated Africans to resist, and resisted Spanish colonization for 9 years. He crossed the sea from Haiti to Cuba, right, to organize people in in Cuba, right, to organize against the resistance of Spanish colonization of Cuba, right. If we think about, the rebellion of Popeye here in Tiwa territory, here in Pueblo territory, right, where the Pueblo people successfully, through a sort of pan-indigenous resistance, which included also some people of African descent who joined in this struggle to remove Spanish conquest here in these territories now called to New Mexico in 1680, that lasted almost 13 years without Spanish occupation. If we put that in the same time period, that's the same time period that the mighty Maroon Society of Palmeiras in Brazil was in same time. So we got to think about these, projects of liberation that coexisted in the same time period. We think about that Haiti, the freedom movement in Haiti to end the occupation of France, of Santo Domingue, where emancipated workers freed themselves and fought against not only the French, but the English, the Spanish, happened around the same time as the rebellion of Tupac Amaru and Tupac Katari in Bolivia and Peru. Or we think about the Great War, the Seminole War, the Mexican independence movement, and the ending of sort of chattel slavery in the United States, completely interrelated. Not only were the critical role of the Black Seminoles in all those three wars, but more importantly that there was a link of freedom that spoke to all of to those movements in general, right? I don't have time to talk about that, but that's a whole huge history about how even the Battle of Cinco de Mayo, which is celebrated sort of this moment of Mexican resistance against French occupation of Mexico, had also an important moment also in the struggle against slavery in the United States, where the French were supporting the Confederacy, and that the victory in not only in the Battle of Puebla, but the ultimate removal of France from Mexico provided that kind of leverage to remove that aid that France was supporting the French white Confederates. Lastly, I just want to sort of say that I think it's important for us to, when we talk about Black and Brown unity, while there's so much beautiful history of resistance and struggle and solidarity, we also have to kind of face the challenge that comes with it, right? That anti-Blackness is not only a technique of subjugation for all peoples, but it's also a pedagogy. And I think Brown identity and our racial makeup is a very complicated aspect, right? Not only does it come with a lot of that legacy of resistance and that, we truly have an African root in our own bloodstream, but it also has its own embracement in Latin America, in the Caribbean, of an embracement to white supremacy, to anti-indigenous and anti-Black racism, to settler-colonialism. So I think in that sense, we have to figure out how we have this struggle, not only about, that immigrants are not a monolithic racial group, especially Latin American brown folks, right? But also, how do we really tackle the question of how brown people also embrace a lot of these kind of these pro-American immigrant points of views, right? Or they embrace sort of racialized language, like we're not criminals, so therefore we shouldn't be, incarcerated. We shouldn't be picked up by detention centers. We shouldn't be picked up in raids, or no regard to the question of Black unemployment in most of our cities, right? So how do we really think about this question that one of the things that I think is important for us to look not only in the legacy of Black August and in particular the legacy of George Jackson, is also the present moment of even something like the California prison strike, hunger strike in 2013, where prisoners were able to find not only the Indian hostility, but to counter the system of the shoe, of these, basically, torture chambers that they built in California prisons to unite under, the guise of ending this kind of inhumane and sickening system. I think it's important for us to think about then the legacy that exists in that kind of unity. In other words, as Thandi was saying, if people can unite in a place that is inherently built imperially built a structure that creates division, that creates violence, that creates conflict, right? Then what is the possibility for us who are in this open air concentration camp called the United States to find our unity of possibilities? So thank you.
Right on, Manuel. Appreciate that. It looks like our brother Kamau is having a few technical difficulties, so we're going to come back to him when he comes on. But that's okay because we got Rosa with us, to do a breakdown about this question and some of the complexities that Manuel just touched upon, and how to cut through some of this and some of these debates that we are having about who's who and who's what, who needs to be where, who has a right to access what, to speak on whose behalf, some of those questions and more. So I turn it over to you, Rosa.
Hey, I'm so happy to see you and Thandi and Manuel and Kamau. Kamau is old. And when I mean old, I don't mean age old. He just doesn't know technology. That's why he needs an assistant. So, that's my little joke for the night. So I'm actually Instagram living this as well, right? So yeah, there's a lot of people watching on Instagram Live right now. First, it's a crazy time. It's always been crazy times, but in this moment, it just feels very different. And I think it is very critical that especially those of us that have had people name us without us being in the room, right? This Hispanic term that I grew up with, and then Latino, Latina, Latinx term, and then realizing that all of this language really seeks to erase us from our Blackness, including terms like Latinidad, which is a very academic term, and all of that kind of stuff. So, I think we're in a place right now where we have to really think about what operational unity looks like and what it means to have at least the same goals. But also, I think we need to weed out a lot of the visible people on all these social media platforms that, as much as they write about revolution, they still sit in a boardroom with a white man who decides to make decisions. And I think that's a very critical thing, especially for younger people who, many of them, get their first taste of organizing in the streets. And then once they're seen as being able to be really viable to any movement, are quickly scooped up from to the non-prison, the nonprofit industrial complex. So I think we're in a time where there's so much visibility, but there's still no significant change, and there's no significant discussion around capitalism and why capitalism really is what fuels a divide. It fuels the mainstream media narrative. It fuels the Black and brown people, as the Black Agenda report has eloquently said, the Black leadership class, which I, as a Puerto Rican, would say, all right, I want to talk about the Puerto Rican misleadership class. I want to talk about Nidia Velasquez, a congresswoman that signed Promesa, and Promesa was put into law by President Barack Obama. And what that did for the island of Puerto Rico is set up a fiscal control board of 7 people on Wall Street that are white, that make all decisions on the budgetary necessities in Puerto Rico, and I think we're in a time right now where people view visibility as power. For me, and coming from a lot of my roots of becoming an organizer in college, what I always remember is 2 of my professors, one that has passed away and one that is living. Dr. Vivian Verdell Gordon, who was the first woman at the University of Virginia to receive her PhD, but she studied the Black family. She was a Black sociologist. And she would tell me, the minute that corporations and magazines and mainstream media want to put you on the cover, it means that you've already lost your political power. And then Dr. James Turner, who coined the term scholar activism, where he in 1969 went to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, upstate New York, and created what I view as the best Black Studies department in the country. And I got to get my master's and be not only schooled by Dr. Turner, but taught by Dr. Turner. And he told me one of the reasons he recruited me was because he wanted me to do my thesis on the Young Lords Party and to focus on the relationship with Fred Hampton Sr., who was assassinated with Mark Clark on December 4th, 1969 in Chicago, and Chacha Jimenez, who turned the Young Lords, quote, gang into a political movement. And I was able to do that. So I think one of the most important things that we do need to address is that younger folks who are in the streets and doing the work is incredible, but that it's a lineage of people before me and after me, right? And before them and after them, that will be critically important to seek all the justice that we look for. So for me, I am at the point where I'm not willing to engage in conversations with people that waste my time. I'm kind of, someone that looks at how old I am and I think, well, I'm 48. if I live to be 96, that means I've lived my half of my life. And I'm no longer interested in being in conversations with people that think that being on magazines or having like white pundits praise you, it equals political success and political consciousness. I think what we're seeing in Wisconsin and the police murders that we've seen, particularly in the United States, are now in this Midwest way. And what I mean is that for a long time, in the work I have been involved with in police brutality, police violence movements, were very East Coast or West Coast. But where was the Midwest, right? So when people are like, oh my God, are there Black people in Wisconsin? You're like, yes. And they're like superly oppressed. And what you actually see in Kenosha, Wisconsin is what we would want to see, which is Black and brown solidarity, and then white co-conspirators for justice and all of that. But I think it's important right now that those of us who are, quote, Latino, Latina, Latinx people, I refer to myself as a Black Puerto Rican, that we really push back on this new narrative that says all of a sudden that Latinos are the most anti-Black people, and that's why Black people are not free, because of people like us. And I don't know where it started, but I know that it's wrong. It's ahistorical, and it's meant to divide us. And when I talk about ahistorical, so many people might have heard the name of Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, or especially in the academy or as a community organizer, you might heard of the Schomburg Library. And Arturo Alfonso Schomburg was a Black Puerto Rican who was exiled from Puerto Rico for fighting for independence. And he came to New York. And when he came to New York, it was the Harlem Renaissance era. So his comrades were people like Zora Neale Hurston and, Elaine Locke and so many people we see from the Harlem Renaissance. But he was also a mentor to people like John Henry Clark, that I actually feel, even saying John Henry Clark's name, people like, who was he? And that in itself is problematic. But also, as a Black Puerto Rican, I look at the history, particularly of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense and the Young Lords Party. And I always, being from the Bronx, being raised in New York, I also look at someone like our mentor, my mentor that's still alive right now and doing incredible work, Dr. Maita Moreno Vega, who created the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diasporic Institute. And she's probably one of the few African descendant women in this country to have started an institution that is brick and mortar, still alive. And what she always says is that we have to remember that they didn't want us to exist, and we have existed. But unless we confront anti-Blackness that comes from every aspect in the world, that we will not be free. So I think we're in a time where, for me, I'm hoping that other, quote, Latino, Latina, Latinx folks understand language that actually not only dehumanizes us, but seeks to separate us as a people of African indigenous descent. And, I also push back on what is happening right now around this term of everybody suddenly embracing being an Afro, whatever, to understand that conversation hasn't really happened. Well, it hasn't happened in the United States. And that a lot of times when people talk about Afro-Latina, Latino, Latinx identity, they go outside of the United States and cite, references, which is critically important, of all Central American and Latin American communities. But in the United States, we still haven't had like even a full survey of people who look like me who'll say, well, yeah, I'm Puerto Rican, but I'm also an African descendant, and what that means globally and what it means collectively, but what it also means politically. And, just to end on this point, I think we also have to be very cognizant and mindful of why the state would want us to divide us, right? Not only because of who we are ethnically and racially, but where we're at geographically. So this state would want us to focus on the West and the East Coast and not think about all the people in the middle. And for me, very personally, my mother, who was born in Puerto Rico, my grandfather, her father, was what Puerto Ricans call a jíbaro, which is a farm worker. And he was recruited to come to the United States to work in the steel mills. And when he got here, he had a choice. He could have gone to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or Youngstown, Ohio. And he went to Youngstown, Ohio. And he was able to raise a family of 16 children. My abuela birthed every one of her children outside of a hospital, which is in itself kind of crazy, right? And I have to this day 14 tias and what we say titis and tios that are in my life. My mom is still alive, and all of my titis and tios are alive except for one. And so I grew up in the summers being in Youngstown, Ohio, very Midwest city. But until I went to college and began to understand who I was and read the history of who I was, I didn't realize what that meant. And I know one time I went to my parents and go, why didn't you tell me about all of this? Why didn't you tell me why Puerto Ricans are American citizens? And what does that mean? And what my father and mother said is, we came to the States to make a better life for you. But when my mother was applying for jobs, she was applying and there would be signs that say no Puerto Ricans and no Irish people can live here or work here. And she had to deal with that. And then when my father came, who he's visibly phenotypically Black Puerto Rican, Afro, and all of that, he drove a cab and he was pulled over and when he was working, and the cop called him the N-word, and he said, no, yo soy puertorriqueño. And the cop said, I don't care what kind of Black N-word you are. So my parents didn't tell me any of this until after I went to college. So for those young people that are listening right now, first of all, most of us don't grow up in movement and organizing spaces. The movement and organizing space for me was college and then the Malcolm X grassroots movement. And I truly consider Kali and Kamau not only my comrades, but my mentors and my teachers. And if I had not joined the Malcolm X grassroots movement, I would not be who I am right now. If I didn't go to college and Dr. Gordon say, wait, you need to read that book. If I didn't meet Richie Perez, who said, wait a minute, this is what the Young Law is about. If I didn't meet Fred Hampton Jr., the son of Fred Hampton Sr., I wouldn't have known a lot of things. And I'm super grateful for that. And I'm just hoping that all of us now, like in this crazy, almost about to be 50, that we give young people a little bit of brevity and kind of a couple of moments to say, oh, wait a minute, this is who I am. And I don't know this, but I know I need to be marching in the streets. And then lastly, as someone who didn't grow up as a movement organizer, I now can say my daughter has. My daughter is an organizer. She's an activist. She's clear. But she also realizes that she has blood family and she has movement family. And I think that's very important. I think there's a lot of people right now who are suffering from depression, that are scared, that have lost people due to COVID or police violence, and that they feel that they can't speak about that. And for me, what I would tell younger people is don't be ashamed that you don't know this. You're not supposed to know this. Even in this age of technology and social media, you're not supposed to know who you are or what you're supposed to fight about. But that also, once you know, you do better. And once you know that you have children, you kind of got to let them do what you taught them to do, in the safest way possible. But I don't think we have the luxury at this moment to hide the truth from anybody. And I think for me, having these spaces of discussion, but also being part of a very close-knit group of comrades, that it's not that we're all about doom all the time. We're like, okay, this is what's happening. How do we figure it out? And who best can we be together to figure out this plan? So for me, if we're fighting for Black liberation, that includes me, that includes my daughter, that includes everybody who's watching right now who is not white. And if you're white and you don't, you find this discussion hard, then you got to check yourself. I don't have time to be talking to young white people about what they should and should be doing while we're literally just trying to stay alive. That's where we're at. We're literally just trying to stay alive. Every time my husband goes to work, I hope that he comes back that night. Every time I see a lot of my comrades doing what they're doing, man, woman, non-gender conforming, trans, and queer, I don't want to wake up the next day and hear that story of someone that I know being killed. So I think a lot of us, at least for me, I've had months of sleepless nights. I am enraged. I am pissed off. I am angry, but I'm also not, I am also hopeful, not in a kind of Jesse Jackson hopeful. For me, at the end of the day, anything we do is not what's going to save us. It's what we do as a community and a people collectively working together is going to save us. I don't believe in institutions or academia to give us a good life, but I believe in everyone that I'm comrades with, that we will somehow make it through this, but also we will leave our children with a legacy where they have to fight as well. And I'm okay with that. And, that's always right now at the moment, my concern. Since so many of my comrades have children right now and teenagers, and, we can't hide anything from them. All we can do is really prepare them, not only mentally, but also physically, and also self-defense wise, And I know that all my comrades have taught their children how to self-defend themselves in a moment, but also how they can also use their language and their bodies as a way to stop white supremacy and this issue of divide and conquer.
All right, so our brother Kamau won't be joining us. He had to break on out to another piece. So we'll catch him, in the next go round. So I really want to just open it up, in the hour we have remaining for a question and exchange, with ourselves and then with the audience. Folks can hit us up with questions. We'll get them here in the piece. I think we've covered a fair amount of ground. There's always more, depth and detail that I think we can and eventually do have to get into. But I guess maybe to just start it up, in terms of some things that I think are very important around this conversation. All three of you touched on the international, if you want to call it that, dimensions of this question and pieces around strategy. But I want us to highlight that a bit more if we can, because in part, I think there's still no accurate way to do it out of this framing. Because I think I can tell you from at least our end, the framing in part around Black and Brown also includes, indigenous folks. So we definitely don't want folks to have the inclusion that the impression that that's what we were leaving out. That's not from our framework what we were leaving out at all. But I think we need to have a deeper conversation. And why? I say that because, this little RNC thing is going on right now as a backdrop to one of the things that's happening. And I was struck the other day, in a debate with somebody about Puerto Rico being, a colony and about the nature of the U.S. empire, and had to bring home the fact that Donald Trump actually had a series of conversations about potentially trading Puerto Rico for Greenland. And then you had, in terms of their legal structure, you had one of the first speakers on Monday night, in the coked up furor. Maybe she kind of lost her memory or something like that. But, she described her mother was Puerto Rican as an immigrant. And I was sitting there and I caught that live. I was like, wait a minute, not like folks from Puerto Rico particularly asked, but under the present structure, they're not immigrant. Like somebody didn't even fact check, So just anyway, I think these kind of strategic kind of conceptions, because what that speaks to is, her own notion of racial positionality, and also I think to, just where the different forces that we are contending with, how they see us all, both as aspects of a trading bloc, aspects of disposable populations that can be, dealt with and discarded at will. That gets, and I want to bring this back to this whole piece around, what you started with, Tanya, just to remind us around, COVID-19, and let's be very clear on who that's, who's taking the brunt of this and why, in the midst of this empire. And they're not just isolated here, but we see the same phenomena also taking place in Brazil, with some of the same, Black and indigenous communities taking the brunt of the blow there, along much the same ideology and practice and reasoning. May have a different, framework but the bottom line of who's on the bottom and why, despite the language differences, etc., is still fundamentally clear. So I just want us to talk about that to bring home, I think, some of the deeper points around this level of strategic unity, that we need to have to take on this empire, ultimately dismantle it and build something new, that could represent all of our interests and affirm our humanity.
Yeah, before Tom they speaks, because he talked about Kimberly Gofield and her talking about her mother being a Puerto Rican immigrant. So first, as Puerto Ricans, she's not who we are. So like wherever that trade happens, I'm going to take Michael Jordan before I take Kimberly Gofield, is what I'm saying. Like no. And that was interesting because I've been watching the RNC like every night as I have to drink to get through it because it's a shit show. But I found that to be actually, my dad called me and was like, where's her birth certificate? And I was like, yeah, I want to see your birth certificate that shows your mother was Puerto Rican. Because you didn't even know that you're not an immigrant, right? Like you're an American citizen and what all that means. But I think it does speak to, especially Puerto Rico, as kind of this Caribbean nation that is the colonized Caribbean nation and what that means, right? So just for everybody out there, we don't accept her and we'll trade her in. And I don't care if it's Waldo from the books or Harry Potter. We will trade her for any of that anytime. So she's not Boricua, she's not Puerto Rican, and what I know to be Puerto Rico, and I don't even think she's ever visited the island anyway. So we're gonna do that racial trade like right now.
White supremacy is so reactionary. And it's so exhausting and tiring. I just want to get stupid people out of the White House. I don't give a care. I don't care anymore. I'm ready to pull the lever for Kamala and Biden just to get dumbasses out of the White House. Can we get dumbasses out of there, please?
Yeah.
I can't take it anymore. Now I know some of y'all who are seasoned activists are like, well, this is a better terrain to fight on because it's in our face. It's the wolf and it's not the. I can't take no more. I can't. I can't.
Well, you might have
I
to.
can't. So let's talk about strategy because I can't take this dumb shit no more. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't. Between Guilfoyle and old girl talking about it's smart to racially profile my brown son. I thought the whole point of transracial adoption was to give them a better station in life. So why did you adopt him if you're still in support of your own son being statistically profiled? I'm tired. I can't do it.
But the sad thing about it though.
So what's the
let's go there a little bit. I think to us, this kind of convention and the shit show, A, is comedy, B is just totally asinine, and insane.
It's horror. It's horror, like Get Out in Lovecraft Country. This is some horror shit.
True, but we have to recognize there's a large part of this empire that they speaking directly to. And unlike the other side of this equation, which is trying to serve two masters, one of the things that we got to recognize on their end, they're very clear about who they targeting, what their message is, and what they aim to deliver. The other side can't say that to the same degree. And I'm just giving folks a warning, like it or not. Same one I gave in 2016. When some folks thought I was crazy, said, no, Donald Trump has a real chance to win because he knows the tune and he knows the music of, white supremacy. He understands that logic. He understands the rhythm. He understands the quote unquote fears and anxieties, the expectations and the desires. What has happened the past 2 or 3 months, I think is beautiful and historic as it is. It definitely does give him a foot up in many respects in propping up this narrative around law and order. And Kennesaw being, taking place in the midst of their convention, we might see, and the three of us who grew up in Khalifa Aslan, this might be a replay of what happened with Thomas Bradley when he ran for governor. Remember, he was up in the polls quite considerably. But then them good white folks in California on election day decided to go another direction. That could very easily happen come November. And I just want folks to not be deluded by that, to understand that is still a critical possibility in this country. Because look, despite all of what he said, despite all of what he's done, Cat is still polling in over 40%.
Right. Yeah. No, and let me say, I have a memory like an elephant, so I know exactly when Kali said this. We were at a convenience in Chicago, and we went to eat, and our sister Ashley Woodison, that now is the executive director of Highlander, was like, no, he could never get elected. And me and Carly were like, yes, he can. And I think part of that was also where we are geographically located, right? Because at that time, I ended up moving to upstate New York. So people in New York think that New York City is the whole state. They don't realize it's a whole state, and that there are more African-American and other folks of color in these upstate regions, right? And that there's actually a very rich history. I mean, we're talking about Frederick Douglass in Rochester. We're talking about Seneca Falls, where Sojourner Truth and many women, Black women are revered. We're talking about Auburn, New York, where Harriet Tubman is buried. So, and also part of upstate New York was an underground for enslaved Africans who made their way to the Canadian border. So I remember that dinner, and me and Kali were like, yeah, Hillary Clinton, if she runs, she'll never win. And Ashley was like, no, she would win because women will vote for her. And I don't know if me or Kali said it. We're like, what white women? Right. So then we come here to the Trump election, and who got Trump into office? White women. 51% of them. So that means it's not just all poor white women, it's white women who are deans, white women who run corporations, white women who are high level, and the way they try to frame it as white women, it's like all these unschooled white women from like West Virginia. And we're like, no, because that's not 51% of them. And for a lot of us as women of color, right, we've dealt with these type of white women all our careers. Right. The white woman who's like, oh, yes, I believe in solidarity. And then like whatever is saying the crazy shit of doing what you do. So I am not convinced that Trump's going to lose. I'm a two frame right now. I am in Albany, New York, and there are more Trump signs than there are Biden and Harris, including on my street, which is actually, it's crazy. But also like, if he loses, these white supremacists are literally preparing themselves if he loses. Because if he loses, what he's going to say is fake news, fake elections, I'm the president. So then who takes him out? Is it the Navy, the dude carrying the football, nuclear codes? Like, is he leaving? Either way, as a people, we're not going to get what we need. Now, would I say I would rather fight a Biden-Harris, ticket once you're in? Of course. But that's also understanding that with voter suppression, with this, quote, fear and law and order, and with Trump being like, yo, I'm not fucking leaving, take me out. Well, look what we just saw. A 17-year-old white boy tackled as he's killing people, then he raises his arms up and past police cars and military tanks, and they did nothing. They didn't even know what he was doing. But also what I saw today that I hope people go and watch this. I really want people to watch this, is that there's a moment where you see these military tanks and they stop at a gas station. And at this gas station is over 30 white militias. And the people in the tank, the militarized police go, do y'all need anything? Yeah, we need water. Okay, we're going to get you water. Thank you for supporting us. So you're like, yo. And then the dude is walking with his arms up and is not shot after he killed 2 people and injured a third. So I am not, I am just at the point where I really don't think that people understand the veracity of this white supremacy, but also what it means internationally, right? So what we're seeing in Brazil, Nicaragua, Ecuador, Honduras, we're seeing Afro-Indigenous people being killed for fighting for their land, people being disappeared. What's happening in Mexico, what's happening in Puerto Rico, what's happening to African descendants who are fleeing and letting be drowned in the Mediterranean Ocean. And I think if anything, of what I just all said is that I would hope that people would understand that we as a diasporic people are catching hell everywhere. And even if you don't see it on your TV, then you need to go watch some other news outlets, because what African diasporic people are experiencing right now is what is really anti-Blackness at levels that we here in the United States could not be able to contend with.
Manuel, Thandi, anything y'all want to add on that, Bill, on that?
Yeah, I think this question about, irregardless of we think that he could win it, which I think everybody's right, that he has a possibility of winning. I mean, they've already created the conditions. We're in the middle of a pandemic where 177,000 people died, and they've cut the mail. I mean, so let's be clear. They have a strategy, but I do think that the most important question that we got to ask ourselves is the alignment that the cops are going to have with him, if he steals these election or if he reneges from not giving up the election. Um, the Migra and ICE joining that kind of fascist sort of like ring that he has, and here, as I moved here to New Mexico, and again, an aspect that played here is the New Mexico the Civil Guard is a militia group that's been harassing groups like the Red Nation here in Albuquerque, who just one of their folks as everybody knows, there was also a shooting very similar to the one that happened in Wisconsin during the bringing down of one of the statues of Oñate. And there's even been now a witness, one of the witnesses who for the pre-trial has already had visits from militia members and the 3%ers and these armed militia folks telling them that they're watching them about all their actions. And so I think, again, everybody tries to debate, have we reached fascism or not? This whole damn experiment has been a fascist, prelude called the United States, and I think that that's the biggest question that we have to ask ourselves. And I do think the question for, this broad, heterogeneous folks group called Latinos or Hispanics and all of that. The truth is that you have Cubans and Venezuelans and other people who will vote 20-30% for Trump, right? And then I'd say even groups that are totally in the camp to try to defeat him, in the message that they have, like where are we in the message around police violence? Where are we in the relationship to the children that are being detained and the families being separated? Or where's the border kind of violence that's playing down for brown people? Again, I think as Rosa was saying, we should talk about all the new kind of wall that the United States has in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Honduras, and El Salvador, right? Which is not only that they're trying to not allow people of African descent from Honduras and Guatemala, El Salvador, but it also denying people from Africa, right? Haitian folks, Cuban folks from even able to come into and Mexico having a whole new terrain of a border wall extension that the United States has. Obviously, Mexico is an oppressed country in relationship to U.S. imperialism, but we have to think about these questions beyond black and brown. We have to think about them in their international dimension. That our folks come from different places, from different positions, right? And that hunger and environment and disposability of our countries is a real thing, and that's what people are escaping, and that's what these border walls are trying to stop.
Thandi, any thoughts?
Lots of thoughts, not necessarily positive either. But I know one of the things that we did in the late 60s, early 70s, when I say we did, it looks like we placed a lot of emphasis, dare I say hope, on international alliances. We were so hopeful that communist China was going to come to our aid. We were so hopeful that Cuba was going to come to our aid. Let's be clear, Cuba come to everybody aid. Cuba probably tired. They come to everybody aid, right? But there was hope that the African nations that were coming out of colonialism, that were coming out of these armed struggles for liberation, would see the work that we were doing here and would join with us, would support us. That type of internationalism is still necessary. International solidarity is still necessary, but we have to talk more strategically about what it is we can do here to free ourselves and what we gonna do to free ourselves. Mao and the ghost of Mao is not coming. They're not going to come help us. Like Cuba, like I said, Cuba is tired. Venezuela got their own struggles that they're fighting against. Yes, we stand in solidarity with against U.S. imperialism, neoliberal policies, against all of these countries. But what are we going to do here? What are we doing any type of work? And it's almost a rhetorical question because if we are, it needs to be under the radar. But what type of work are we doing with these troops? You know, Trump is the commander in chief of these troops. Trump deals in fake news. He lies all the time. When the election results come in, are they going to believe their commander in chief? Are they going to look with their own eyes, utilize their own discernment? That's not what soldiers are known for. They're known for taking orders. So what are the realities of where we are and how are we going to confront them? And hopefully not repeating what I think we saw in the 60s and 70s, hoping that somebody was going to come help us. We all we got. What are the strategic moves that we can make within this empire to save ourselves? And yeah, a lot of that don't need to be on Zoom. It don't need to be on StreamYard. It needs to be happening. And just because Tandy don't know about it, don't mean it's not happening. I think somebody should send me a text though. But yeah, it needs to happen. And so that's my concern. What are we doing what we need to do? And I can just from the last couple of nights, I don't feel like we are. I don't feel like we are because you should you should not be chasing someone with an AR-15 with a skateboard. You should not be doing that. That dude should not be dead right now. And so for our quote unquote allies or accomplices or co-conspirators, whatever title it is they're using, we have to understand who we are dealing with. You know, we lost Heather Hare. Heather, is it Hire or Hare? I don't remember the young sister's name. Hit by the car in Seattle, Washington. You know, now we've got these two people. But even before then, these are protests against police terror, right? But even before that, up in the Bay Area, where the guy was attacking people with a knife, and two white guys stepped in, one of whom lost his life. It may have been two lost their lives. Another man uh, was disfigured horribly. You know, these people will kill you. They have killed us. They will kill us. Some of them are training to kill us. What is our response going to be? Voting? A petition on change.org? That's not going to get it. So the question I got to throw out for everyone, do we really understand what we're dealing with and what are we doing about it?
Well, in the main, let's answer honestly. No. Let's just answer honestly. Now, I'm not answering that people don't necessarily know what they are dealing with. I think that people have a grasp on that. But however, I think what people believe they can do about it is limited, which is not true. Um, but I also think, you know, um, in our own movement, and even in this conversation, there's some things that I think we have to push on that you touched on.
Mm-hmm.
There's an over reliance in our movement and in our movement's thinking. And I'm gonna just put out as a challenge. Maybe we can debate it. Other folks can debate it. But folks have too much faith, regardless of everything that experience has taught us the last 500 years. Folks still have too much faith in bourgeois order and bourgeois process.
Mm-hmm.
And people still fundamentally believe, as you were saying, not even so much that somebody else from Soviet Union or China or Cuba or coming to help, but that the state is a neutral entity, which it is not, and that, you know, at the end of the day, the police or some instrument of the government is going to kind of restore order, meaning keep the destruction, the murder at what has now been deemed acceptable levels. and that is what's going to be kind of upheld at the end of the day in this process through elections, etc. And one of the things I've been trying to say it again.
Is that what you mean by bourgeois?
Yeah, that I mean, how much in our own minds do people believe that this is a society of quote unquote law and order, and that if I call somebody, the law is going to come in the form of the police or some other instrument and deal with some issue or contradiction I might have with my neighbor, or even with somebody who lives in my house, to be a kind of a force of arbitration, and then a force of, let's balance this out and create some process, or like we have that in our own heads.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a tremendous impact, I would argue, about how we think about electoral politics, and that we see that not as just a space of where policy is constructed around, who's going to be able to play with the toys, most effectively. And I say that, and I'm not saying it jokingly, because look, the fundamental things that we need to deal with, you can tackle around capitalism in regards to policy. You can contain it, but voting away capitalism ain't gonna happen, right? Voting away patriarchy ain't gonna happen. Voting away imperialism is not gonna happen. So at best, you can kind of contain some elements of framework, but it's gonna take some stronger social movements, which have a deeper political and ideological understanding of what we're fighting for, and how we aim to get there, and who our opposition is, and what instruments do they have, mainly the state, but also the instruments of capital, and what we need to do to choke them, to arrest them, to smash them, to destroy them, to negate them. And I think what I'm arguing for, Tony, is that part of that, I think, also starts in our mind.
Yeah.
Because a lot of folks, let me put it this way, what I would argue is kind of the distinction. And I've heard many people, and within this framework, people will be right. But many people say, well, he walked right past the police. We expecting the police to do something. And not saying, well, he's on their side. Mm-hmm. But there's this expectation that they were going to be some neutral force and stop him from doing what he was doing. That's a fallacy of our own thinking.
Neutral and objective.
We need the folks when you step outside, all the young folks. I'm encouraged by what's happening to the utmost degree. Still got a long way to go to be a revolutionary moment and a revolutionary transformation, but it's damn near encouraging, and I'm happy I've lived this long to see, this level of moment, this level of upsurge. But we need to get people to understand that if you're going to step outside your house to challenge this beast, understand the stakes and understand who is on your side. And that requires a whole nother level of organization, which, folks are going to have to learn, I think, the hard way, because a lot of this has been more spontaneous than it's been organized. But it's going to have to transfer into something organized. So who the person is standing with you, what they're capable of, what their capacity is, what they're willing to do, how they will respond in an emergency situation. So you don't have somebody just acting on impulse, if at all possible, with a skateboard.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that is that what we've seen in these last couple of months is like the quick co-optation and of language from corporations, right? That, like here Amazon is saying Black Lives Matter and then running a red, black, and green flag on their banner. Meanwhile, they're firing people like Christian Smalls, who in Staten Island was organizing workers. So I think what we've seen is kind of what some of us have been part of by watching, which is there's now this middle war. And that middle war is this Black and brown bourgeois elite class of social media, quote, revolutionaries, who are willing to sit with Mark Zuckerberg but not get anything from him, which would be like end Facebook, decentralize it, and pay your workers a $50 an hour living wage with full benefits. And I think what they're savvy at is marginalizing our voices as like, that's old school, that's not how we win power. And meanwhile, it's like, yeah, you've done this the last 3 months, and look at what happened to Jacob Blake. And look at the fact that there's been 100 Black and brown people shot by the police since George Floyd. And if actually we were able to, or we would talk about all the Latino brothers and sisters that have been killed, there would, and Native brothers and sisters that have been killed, the outrage might be even more. And what it comes down to, and I always say this, people got ego. And when I talk to a lot of younger people, I'm like, listen, it's America. You have an ego. You got to realize you have it, and you got to realize why you're the type of person that wants to give a speech. That's all good. I have it. I like being on the mic. I like being around people. I like talking about politics in this way. But what I'm not going to do is allow a corporation to give me money tomorrow to then walk away from my politics principles. And it, I mean, look, I don't hesitate to say it right now, but I'm sure by tomorrow I'll get a couple emails about how I'm a hater, which is like, and that's a way to also discount people like us, like, you're a hater, you're old school, you're whatever. And you're like, no, I'm talking about Stephen Biko and Marcus Garvey and Fannie Lou Hamer, and how the fuck do the Democrats try to co-opt Ella Baker? What are y'all talking about? She talked to us about this, and y'all are happy that Joe Biden said her name. Well, I don't think she was happy Joe Biden said her name. How about that? How about Ella and Ida and Fanny out your mouths? Because what you're doing is making some visual presentation that does not lead to any power alignment or power analysis, let alone, let's just talk about redistribution of the wealth. And I am happy to see that the NBA and WNBA and MLB, they're not on boycott, they're striking, they're unionized workers. And I think this is very important at this moment to say we're seeing a unionized workforce, even though they're like on the upper echelon of unionized workforce. But a unionized workforce saying, nah, hell no. Nah, we ain't doing this. Right? Now it's up to us as organizers and movement people to try to be in those spaces. We're not going to be in those spaces. It's going to be those same people that just want visibility. But I think it is an important thing that we see, and we call it what it is, a labor strike. It's not a boycott. It's a labor strike. And hopefully that the rest of labor will come through, or will at least get the shine that they need to get shine when they're shutting down ports in Seattle and Los Angeles and San Diego. So, I mean, I really believe that younger people are looking for some type of political ideology that is not framed within a selfie on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Let us know if you get some hate mail.
Come on,
that was pretty mild.
We're good.
No, but I want to just chime in on this. I do think, again, that like you said, Kali, and I think as Rose is saying so clearly, is that we don't have a revolutionary movement in the United States, right? And I even put myself, I've been like a radical reformer, like that's what I've done, or that's how my brain has been trained, right? And I don't feel ashamed for that work. I still think that everything that we need to win, it needs to be fought, and if you don't fight for it, then it's you can't fight it in the abstract either. But I don't think we're as prepared yet to be a full revolutionary organization that has a defensive, offensive, counteroffensive, covert, underground, extrovert kind of version of ourselves in a real way, right? I mean, I think like I said, here in New Mexico, I've joined an organization like the Red Nation that's trying to figure out these big questions about what kind of vehicle can we build? And I think that's really important for us to think about. And I think two things that I think would be important for us to put into perspective, right? One, I think that that this question about urban pushout has, especially Black urban pushout, where we see some of these major struggles that are happening, right? Like Ferguson, um, and other parts of the country where these big kind of explosions have happened, haven't been in those big cities, right? Those are the places where people are getting pushed out from, right? Like I know I was in Ferguson. Literally, people from Ferguson were from St. Louis and pushed 40 minutes, away from that city and stuff. And that's they faced a new regime of struggle there. And again, what's our reach into those regions, right? What's our reach with kind of grassroots folks that are on the ground, right? And the second thing that I think that is really we have to really contend with is that white materialist kind of buyout is no longer here, and that's why these people are so wacko, right? Because whatever material advantage they had is gone, right? I mean, and even though Trump might be promising them all that under the guise of like safety and America first, we know that that's exactly the opposite of what this system is trying to provide, and that the Democratic Party is not providing anything different. They might be promising you maybe some white materiality for you, right? But the truth is that there's no longer a new colony to explode. That's why Musk is trying to get to Mars, right? I mean, we have to understand that it has reached its limit as an empire, and that the only thing that it has now in its own power is to consume everything in front of it. Not only the land, the people, and anybody who'd ever even benefit from it is now going to be the ones that are going to be consumed by it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. A couple of years ago, when Arlene and myself were doing initial was every 36 hours and every 28 hours report, the Operation Ghetto Storm piece. One of the things that we noted then, and this was 2012, 2013, was how many of these, extrajudicial killings were taking place and like in these small suburbs, and some of the pieces I know I put out earlier was that, I was calling them like these new contact zones, basically. And, one of the things that I think this pattern has definitely played itself out the last 5 years. I think on a heightened level in the way you talk about now with Pinashoa, now, but also with Ferguson, I think has really highlighted that. But I think there's another dimension of that that speaks to what you were talking about in part, Rosa, which is the black. You had mentioned earlier, Tanya, about the black misleadership class, right? Black petty bourgeois forces and the political machines that exist in a place like LA or Oakland or Atlanta or DC or Baltimore, which acts as a buffer zone and another source of kind of containment, and support for like the nonprofit kind of organizing sector, if you would, and this whole politics of containment, that both of those different forces, the politicians, the black politicians, and a lot of these organized, forces are vested in. And I'm highlighting this because I think one of the things we've seen since the second week of June is this heightened narrative around just kind of your good protester and your bad protester. And then now there's even been more kind of additions to that. Is about white folks in Portland and other places kind of hijacking the movement or kind of taking it astray. And I think that also speaks to this point around white materiality that you're speaking to, Manuel, because that's going to split in different ways. Because I think a lot of these young folks are out there on the streets, chanting with all their heart, Black Lives Matter, whether they understand that or fully grasp what it means or the implications of it. But I think many of them are becoming clear that they are not, the promise that they were going to live better than their parents and their grandparents is just not real. It's gone. right? And that they see more of themselves in solidarity, with Black folks, with Latinos, and there's still gaps there, and there's still a lot of learning that has to emerge there, to bridge some of these gaps around white supremacy and their own understanding and logic. But I think there's another break that we have to embrace, right? And I don't, I'm with Rosa 100%. I'm not going to waste a whole bunch of time talking to folks who ain't willing to learn and not willing to listen, particularly white folks, but those who are. I think we need to break them off a little something, right? And put them to some critical tests, and take them on and put them back into some critical tasks. And one of the critical tasks that's always been here, as long as the settler-colony been here, can y'all organize your own people, right? That's your first task and responsibility. Handle your folks, organize at that point of source in your community, to fight the militias, or to at least give us some heads up as to what's going on. And that's a critical task. We shouldn't underestimate that at all.
Yeah,
And,
you know that you say that, Carly. I have such a huge family. My abuela, who I spoke about my abuelo earlier in Youngstown, Ohio, where he worked in a steel mill. Like he did raise 16 children on one salary. When you look at that, you're like, that's how did that
possible, right?
How is that possible, right? And my parents, the more I went to college and the more I got my political home with the Malcolm X grassroots movement and Black August and all of that, it just was a lot of conversations. And I would say for like the last decade, my dad and me have actually grown very close, where he's like, I just went, he has a business in the Bronx. He's been there for 50 years. So anytime I go see him in the Bronx, people are like, that's Willie. He's the mayor. He's the mayor. Kijamo. He's like we know who he is. Well, my dad was working when Amadou Diallo was shot 41 times in 1999. Meaning his store was 2 blocks away and he heard the gunshots. And I was back living in the Bronx, and he called me the next day and he says, something happened. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be big. And by the next day, everybody found out in New York City and around the world that Amadou Diallo had been shot. And I was part of a movement of people that Richie Perez brought together, right? So I think like us telling our historical narratives is so critically important, because history is often seen as stagnant, where it's like, no, we're publicly living history and telling the story. And what it all circles back to is 3 weeks ago, my mom's like, where can I go to a protest? I'm like, what? She's like, I want to go to a protest. And, we have so many ways now where you could put in the zip code and be like, oh, this protest is taking place. And I was like, Ma, you sure? She's like, me and your dad did not work this hard, go through everything we did, support families, our entire family to have this life, or you and Alicia and everybody for this shit to be happening. So where's the protest? Mind you, my mom and dad are 78 and went to a protest.
Answer the woman's question. Where the protest?
Right. Well, it was in a very. My parents live a little bit outside in the suburbs of New York City, and I was like, "Do you need a sign?" She's like, "No, I made my sign. I got my outfit. We out." And I was like, "Yes," because I've had these conversations with them, and I know where they have politically moved, right? But to have my mom be like, "What the fuck? I sacrificed 60 years so that you and my granddaughter don't have to go through this," right? Which is what Kali is saying, that there's always an opportune moment to strategize and like broaden out the movement work. And I still do believe in accountability for myself, when folks tell me something. But I do think that we have to begin to talk about post this election, whatever happens, we need to not talk about, we need now to support the people doing the work of self-determination, whether it's Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi or green workers in the Bronx, all the way to Soul Fire Farm up here where I live in Albany, New York. Like, what does land look like? What does community look like? How do we feed each other, not only physically, but mentally? Because I do believe that at this moment, a lot of people are suffering from mental anguish and stress. And as someone who has talked about my issues around mental health, I am very worried. I am very worried about our frontline justice activists, warriors who are there 48 hours, 72 hours, 190 hours, day in and day out, and cannot take a moment to process that. And I think we have to talk about that, because as much as we can be physically assaulted by the state, our mental health is also being physically assaulted, which keeps a lot of us in a place of doom. And also where we begin to feel very guilty about not being everywhere every time. I think that's something we have to acknowledge and be there for many of our comrades.
Well, there's a number of ways I want to take this, but we got 15 minutes. So I want to give everybody, about 5 minutes, to just end with any parting shots. I know I'll just say, just to open up, on our end, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I actually do think there are some core elements to build a revolutionary force and a revolutionary program in this empire. One of the contributions that we've been trying to make to give that some framing, we still got a lot of work to do. We're going to try to publish like a little book on it, but it's this build and fight program. And we see this as being based in particularly the first kind of core elements of it, around mutual aid, food sovereignty work, that's going on in many places, cooperative production, what we call community production, and then all the different work that's taking place in the context of the strike action, which is happening. And there's different types of strikes. There's stuff that's going on with the Wildcats all across the country. I mean, there's been hundreds of them now. They haven't been getting as much, reporters as they were in March and April, but they're still going on. And then you got rent strikes that are going on of a tremendous nature, also not getting as much kind of clarity. But that there's a material force that's out there dealing with these realities. We have to figure out how to combine all of this energy and motion together. And one of the things that, we've tried to pull together on our end is create a coalition called the People's Strike, to try to bring a lot of these different forces together. It ain't easy. We don't have no money or resources, no paid organizers to do it. And large part of this is kind of by design in the here and now. But we think that there's a path forward. And what we want to put forth around this build and fight program is that is something that we can start working on and need to be working on tangible right now. And definitely something that's going to have to carry us forward in the future past the election, regardless of who wins. And it's a program which is very much centered around, first and foremost, what can oppressed people, working class people, do for ourselves? And what do we have to do for ourselves to transform our material conditions and build some actual power? So I want to encourage folks to kind of check those entities out, check those pieces out, look for us to try to give some more definition, clarity. And we're going to put it out for, folks to debate, tear it up, because that's what we need to do, to sharpen the ideas and come to some sharper realization and conclusion on how we actually going to act in the here and now to change the circumstances, and transform and dismantle this empire. So that's my offering as a parting shot. I'll go in reverse order from how we started. Rosa, if you can take 4 or 5 minutes, then we'll go with Manuel and then close out with Tanya.
Yeah, it won't even take that long. What I really want people to do is start reading books again. Books, like buy a book, open it and read it. So what I did want to leave people with is first Jackson Rising, the struggle for economic democracy and Black self-determination in Jackson, Mississippi. And one of the co-editors is Kali Akuno. I always tell Kali I would be the best publicist for him ever, right? So I want everybody to get this and read it.
You talking about Ajamu Nangwaya?
Oh yeah, Ajamu Ngare and Kali Okuno. Yes, that's you. Okay. And then no doubt The Murderers of Oscar Grant by Thandisizwe Chimurenga. Yes, Thandi, who wrote a book. We're all kind of like stuck somehow in the house. I'm the type of person that's like, I am not going out. I don't trust nobody. And I'm also claustrophobic and prone to panic attacks. So I want to tell people out there who feel bad that they can't go out, do not feel bad. And it's also a global pandemic. I am not happy to see some of my comrades chilling with 200 people at a rooftop. No, not right now. But, I think this is actually maybe a time that maybe our ancestors are giving us to say, yo, you really shouldn't go anywhere. Take a moment, read a book, not a tweet, not an Instagram post. Read a book. I think we've lost that, and I don't like that, because if we are to fortify ourselves, it's also fortifying our political self. So for me, I'm just grateful to be not only with you all, who are people that teach me and make me look at something differently, but also like, I know I could call people, I know I could say, this is bad. I'm not having a good day. Or like, today is the day where I'm shutting it down and just going to lay on the couch, Netflix and chill and watch Lovecraft Country. Thandi gets me on that one. Let me tell y'all, everybody, you want to see some real shit about some dope ass Black people and revenge? I May Destroy You on HBO and Lovecraft Country. Right? Kali's probably like, he never watches TV or anything. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, please, and I think that's okay, because I actually do believe in sometimes media, breaking some barriers and whatever. And I just encourage everybody to know that, or to have at least a close group of people that you can call on. It doesn't have to be a political call. It could just be a call like, I didn't really have a good day today. So like, what's good? Or I don't know what to do with Alicia. She's 15, driving me crazy. I'm telling her to get off the phone. And she's like, where am I going? It's a global pandemic. What else am I supposed to do? And I'm like, right. And as many of us who have children in our lives, whether we birth them or have them, I am very cognizant that this is a very stressful time where those of us who have privilege can say, well, I'm keeping my daughter home. I'm not sending her to school. And I am very worried about teachers and educators in general at every level who have said they're scared, and they're writing their wills. And what does it mean that we have a country that is basically, through the president, willing to experiment on us as human beings and experiment on our children? So all that to say is that we hope these type of conversations people could reflect back on, but we also, I know as all organizers and activists right here, know that the only way we survive is usually through our personal relationships with our people, and are like, hey, just checking in on you. How you doing? Good. Okay. Just want to make sure you're all right. So Kali, I just want to say that I think we're all super grateful for what all you have done in Cooperation Jackson, the whole crew, because it didn't start last year. This has been an almost 15-year project. And I would say with Kali, it probably started when Hurricane Katrina and the levee breach of New Orleans, that we're dealing with that commemoration this week, that allows us to have Cooperation Jackson, but also independent media and people like Thandi and Manuel, who are here to definitely like kind of make it more feasible and break it down. the politic, but also the fact that at the end of the day, as Che Guevara said, the revolutionary is guided by the greatest feelings of love. And I know that we all have that here, and we hope that all of you can have that yourselves, because that's really important.
Yeah. Again, thank you. I'm really just honored to be here with everyone and share this, this breath and this moment with y'all. Three things that I think important. One is, now that we've moved away from the kind of we're still in this moment of the defund, but there's actual real struggles, like the struggle in Oakland, where the Black Organizing Project was able to remove the school police in Oakland. They're still now in the fight to actually make that into a real thing, and so they need a lot of support. There's young people in Chicago who have been trying to remove the police from school in Chicago that haven't. They've now gone to 3 votes and they've lost 3 votes, but each time they're making new gains, each time they're pushing it. And I think there's important sort of struggles that are happening out there, that we move away from just the kind of like abstract at the fund and real groups doing that work, or groups in Los Angeles like Cadre and Strategy Center and others who just won $25 million a cut from the Los Angeles School Police Department, which is larger than most city departments in the country. So I think that's just an important set of struggles that are really happening. The second thing that, just as Rosa was saying, I really send everybody to read the Red Deal by the Red Nation. It's a 3-part piece. It's about in the occupation, healing our bodies and healing our planet. It's sort of like a manifesto, program of resistance, strategy paper, response to the Green Deal. Really important set of like thoughts that I'm really hoping that people can engage. And just lastly, I think that it's the longevity that we need to all be here, and I think that's what I'm hoping, that we also find that time to not take care of ourselves in the kind of abstract of just like, self-healing or self-care, but that in the collective, right, given that we can't be face-to-face, right, I really want to thank Kali and Thandi and others who, and Rosa for, having this conversation with us, and hopefully that this is also another way that we can find, just a new tool, a new way to, resist, which I think is what we need right now.
And where do I start? One thing, Rosa, don't forget Watchmen, also on HBO. Don't forget that one. Add that to the repertoire. Kali, you got to get with this. I would like to add Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice as one of the books that we need to get with and study and grapple with. Of course, there's Soul Dad Brother and Blood in My Eye. We're still in Black August. We're talking about George Jackson. But I think we also need to talk about Khalil Gibran Muhammad and his book on the history of Black criminality, how Black criminality was made. I think that is an excellent piece that we need to study and grapple with as we see more and more of these incidences of anti-Blackness, murderous anti-Blackness playing out. So we definitely have to up our study. And we also need to take inventory. We need to take personal inventory. What are we capable of doing? What are we prepared to do? Anybody who knows me here in Los Angeles knows that when it comes to driving somewhere, I'm your girl. You need a ride? I got you. You want me to get out on the front line? I probably ain't got you. I got bad knees. But I can sit in my car and drive you to every demo. I can drive you to get your groceries. I can drive you to get the supplies for the demo. I am your girl at this point in time, right? So what are we prepared to do? What do we need to do? What are we prepared to contribute? Every Vincent Harding, author of There Is a River, he talks about small creeks make a river, the river of resistance. That's why he named his book There Is a River. African people have always resisted. But it's not just something unique to black people. Poor whites have resisted. We know the indigenous people have resisted. We know that Mexicanos, Chicanos have resisted. All people have resisted. Women have resisted. Gays, lesbians, gender non-conforming, trans people have resisted. We have to create a river of resistance that includes all of us traveling in the same direction to dismantle this project that is not only killing us, it's killing the planet. It is killing the planet. And it could possibly be this pandemic is a way of the planet showing us, you see, the planet is taking a breath. It's like, whew, for a minute, it's taking a breath. Less smog, animals coming out to play and frolic. The planet is dying. The planet is being killed. We know who's doing it. We know where they live. Either we're going to work with the planet or we're going to work against the planet. So I wanted that to be my my final words, but I can't because I got to give a shout out. It's August 27th, and we're talking about something that occurred behind the walls, the development of Black August. And I would be remiss, since we're talking about August 27th, I would be remiss if I did not recognize that on this date in 1974, Joan Little, a Black woman who killed a white prison guard in self-defense and escaped from the Beaufort County Jail in North Carolina. When we look at the phenomenon of police violence and we only focus on Black men who are killed, we need to pay attention to it because it's egregious and it's a disparity. This is not about what Black women are also killed also. This is about what Dr. Trevor Lindsay calls the totality of police violence. If we don't look at the violence that is meted against Black women, not just murder, but sexual violence, we're missing the picture. We're missing how policing is failing, and we're missing how policing must be abolished. So a shout out to my ancestor, Joan Little, who killed a racist cracker guard because he was sexually assaulting her in North Carolina on this date in 1974. And I'm gonna leave it at that. Now I have no idea where Kali went.
Yeah, so I think Kali is in Jackson, Mississippi, and as many of you know, there has been just horrific, catastrophic damage from this hurricane, which has also affected Jackson, Mississippi. So people are losing power in that. So he might not be able to get back on. So we're going to sign off. First, on behalf of Kali and Manuel, Thandi, Cooperation Jackson, Kamau, and community movement builders, we're really glad that people turned to see this. And the thing about doing stuff like this is that you can watch it later on or watch it tomorrow. And I also, everybody on Instagram Live, thank you. We encourage you to definitely look at all of the work that we've been doing collectively. And, you know, to know this is what it means to struggle. Like, it's not a sprint. As Mumia said, it's a long distance run, you know, and I know that all the people here collectively, the 5 people you saw here tonight, have over 100 years of organizing experience, you know, and movement building. So we wish everybody, first and foremost, safety, health, love, and to all the young people, everybody under 35 who's a youth, thank you for what you're doing. We appreciate that for those of us who can't be out there on the streets. But we also would encourage you to sharpen that political ideology so we don't depend on who the president is to give us freedom. So with that, I think we're gonna, sign off, and power to everybody, love to everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy. Share this video out, and hopefully we'll see you on the streets or we'll see you here organizing. Have a good night. Peace, everybody.
Peace. Everybody stay safe.